he'd have been killed several times over, wouldn't he? It's like, oh, let's put him in the airlock. Oh, we're going to press it right now. We're going to press it. No, no, no. And he manages to talk his way out again.
And we are here for another one of the Skeleton Crew weekly discussion shows where I talk about an episode of Skeleton Crew with a different guest each week. And this week I am joined by Dave of Comics in Motion, VHS Strikes Back, and the Chris and Dave's Reality Cast, who also is one of my co-hosts on Clone Wars Conversations. And we actually started talking about Skeleton Crew a little bit before, and we were like, let's save this for the recording. So this is episode 7. We're going to be in so much trouble. Now, before we delve into this episode in particular, why don't you tell the lovely audience how you'd felt about Skeleton Crew, when you heard its announcement. I suspect your announcement story is going to be the same as everyone else I've had on the pod, including me, which is, yeah, I guess I'll watch it because it's Star Wars. But how did you feel from that announcement right up to episode 6 before we got into episode 7?
So I think finding out about this was probably through you, Mike. You'd probably mentioned it either in podcast or either in conversation. Sometimes my memory gets a bit hazy with these things. It's like, I remember, I'm sure Mike said, now, was it because I was listening to him or actually having an active two-way conversation? But, I mean, there's been other things like Tales of the Jedi and what have you that I haven't watched. I'm not quite as much of a completionist as yourself. Once I'm into something, I really have to commit to it. So I'm a bit more choosy about what do I actually want to invest my time in. So I had very little awareness about what it was, and then I saw the trailer and I thought, oh, this looks fun. This looks something completely different. So yeah, let's give it a go. And even from the trailer, you had that 80s Goonies in a Star Wars universe feel from it. And I thought, oh, I mean, smashing up some things that I absolutely love, you know? And I think Tonya said last week, this could almost be directed by Steven Spielberg. You just needed a few more divorces in it for parents. And then
daddy issues.
You'd have the whole lot. So going into it, I feel like, you know, the first 2 episodes dropped and I thought, okay, yeah, this is interesting. There's something interesting going on with Jude Law's character there as well. Is he a goodie? Is he really a Jedi? Probably not. You know, he's just having the kids on. And that kind of almost like a nostalgic novelty pulled me through the first couple of episodes. And then all I've heard about this show from your show and like listening to others and seeing things on YouTube, everyone is so positive about it. But I have to admit, I was a bit nervous coming on today because I thought, I don't think I'm into this that much. Once that novelty had worn off, I was like, okay, we're doing stuff and the kids are bumbling along from here to there. I just don't know how into it. And I just think I'm the wrong demographic. I'm too old and grumpy for this show, but luckily this week Kin hit it out of the park and I was like, oh, they've got me, I am now in. Which I'm sure we're getting to why, but yeah, I kind of looked out a little bit on the running order there, because yeah, I think I was almost at that point where I'm going to drop out. You know,
I think I don't as well.
Yeah, I don't need to see this. It doesn't seem to impact anything. It's just, again, it's aimed at a different demographic. It's trying to bring in that next generation of Star Wars fans, which is fantastic. But I just didn't feel like the show was for me. But I changed my mind today.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the things, and I've said it numerous times like a broken record, is I think, you're up to date with all the live action Star Wars. It's really just the animated stuff you don't watch all of, which, which is fine, because the animated stuff, a lot of it is amazing, not all of it is. But we'll get there in Clone Wars Conversation eventually. I probably won't make you guys watch Star Wars Resistance, but we'll see how much we need that content. But with the broken record thing, it's more, I think that although I have enjoyed a lot of live action Star Wars, and I think Andor's probably the exception, I think I think Mandalorian and Andor are exceptions, but I think all the other live action series would have been stronger as a movie. And I think with this one as well. I'm really enjoying this. I think it's fun. Love talking about it week to week. But I mean, each episode, with credits, is like 37 minutes, but actually they're really about 30 on average. And you think 8 episodes of 30, that's 4 hours. Well,
15 minutes of end credits.
And the recap as well, and the title credits. So I think actually each episode is probably averaging 25 to 30 minutes. But still, that's around 4 hours, which is fine. But realistically, if you shave down certain elements of it, it could become like, it's a hard one because with a kids movie, it really needs to be 90 minutes, no more than 2 hours. And I feel like if you shave this down, you'd get a solid 2.5 hour movie. And I think maybe because if it was a movie, they wouldn't do certain things in certain ways. There's maybe a bit of like plodding along bits. But generally, although I am enjoying this, I do find the issue with it is that, and it happened with the Kenobi show, happened with Book of Boba Fett, and it happened with this a little bit, is when you have a 3-act structure, the first act is really interesting, the final act is really interesting, but the middle act is kind of connecting the two, setting things up, kind of getting stuff together, whatever. And I think unfortunately what happens is in all these shows, again, because they're episodic and they can't just stop. They have to kind of wrap up. So they have to have like stories within the stories a little bit, at least to some degree. And I think what happens then is pretty much for all the Star Wars shows I've found, the last 2 episodes are amazing and the end 2 episodes are amazing. And there's normally one brilliant one in the middle. Acolyte was kind of the opposite to that in a weird way. But like generally I've found that sort of around this time, you know, episodes 5 and 6 of 8 usually are the kind of the ones that are a bit weaker. If they're not going to be one of those like top tier phenomenal episodes smashing out of the park, people lose themselves a little bit because I think it's really hard when you're not watching a show like House of the Dragon, which I haven't seen series 2 yet, to be fair, but like when you're not watching a show that's like an hour long, really epic, kind of like Andor is, when it's like every single thing is so significant and adult and all this kind of stuff. When you're like every episode's giving me something. And I think with this is like there's certain episodes which aren't meant to give you something, so you kind of lose steam a bit. And so I think Star Wars is outside of animation, I generally think Star Wars is best as movies. I quite like the one and done thing because then, contrary to the point of the show, we don't analyze bits as much. And I think with Acolyte, I think with Kenobi, especially the weaker live action Star Wars projects, maybe not Book of Boba Fett, they would be like made better with a movie. I don't know if you share that before we get into this.
I definitely feel like, again, I don't know if I'm just making it too obvious because of the Goonies parallel, but yeah, if you made it, you chopped it down and made it, I mean, so many of these things are, you know, straight out of the Goonies.
Oh, yeah.
Or there was some scenes, I think, with the parents running through the forest. I was like, well, that's E.T. It just looks straight like that. But definitely, I don't think this lends itself to a weekly serial type watching. I think binging this, even if you didn't chop it down to a movie or anything, I think I'd have more enjoyment if I just binged the whole thing or in a couple of sittings or something like that. There's something about, I don't care enough to know that when I sit down at this point on a Wednesday, okay, what happened before? And I can watch the recap, but because there hadn't been anything that really emotionally had me invested, I think it was just, okay, let's watch this. Let's see what's happening again. And like I say, there wasn't enough. And I tell you, one of the other weird things, this is probably possibly just a Dave thing. I used to love watching things for like, and getting one tiny little Easter egg or something, you know, and it rewards the fans, and you're like, oh, that thing in the background there is fucking ice cream maker or whatever it is. Now it seems like every show, and especially Star Wars and the MCU suffers from it as well, they are trying to pack in so many references to other things. I almost feel like I need to watch it 3 times and then I need to go to a YouTube breakdown of all the Easter eggs or something like that. And it's like, oh, fucking hell, I didn't spot all of these things. I'm not a real fan. You know, it's just a weird thing that I end up beating myself up about. You know, it's just a weird thing. They're not going to stop doing that, and I don't think they should, because for their super fans, you know, it's brilliant that they can spot all these things. But yeah, it almost not repels me from it, but it just puts me off it a little bit.
Yeah, there is, unfortunately. We're in the franchise universe at the moment with Star Wars, the MCU, with obviously DC, and now rebooting their universe for, what was this, it's only in theory the second time with movies, but I think the Burtonverse was probably actually the first time, and then once Schumacher did the other two, it kind of fell off. So I kind of almost view, and then there's the Dark Knight trilogy, which is kind of its own thing. I kind of view the DC as like having maybe 2 to 4 universes in air quotes, but
I don't think the universes were really a thing. I mean,
Arrowverse.
if you think
the Arrowverse was there, you go. There's the 3.
yes, yeah. So the CW stuff, but I mean, even that was when did that start? Sort of mid 2000s. I think in terms of the movies, DC. I mean, you had the Superman movies, you had the Burton movies, of course, but then, like you say, it got all weird and Schumachery. But they were just individual movies. It's like the Fox X-Men stuff.
And Spider-Man, yeah.
They could, for that original trilogy, they couldn't even keep fucking continuity with that. So they never, movie studios were never ambitious enough to really build out a studio. I do think Marvel sort of changed the game with that when they ended up having that whole Infinity Saga. It was like, holy shit. And it's not perfect, but they're trying to keep everything together. Whereas I think before that, they release a few Batman movies, and then it's like, all right, shit, let's make a different direction and go down a different route. So I don't think in the movie space that we've seen a franchise era like we have now.
Agree completely. I mean, I'd even say, like, me as a big Star Wars fan, I watch these shows and I want to get this conversation out and things, and I don't love rewatching Star Wars episodes. There's occasional ones, there's the Acolyte one, the big fight scenes. I watch that quite frequently because it's some of the best Star Wars action scenes ever. But I do, as me, a big super fan, I don't rewatch episodes that often. I get the hankering, like I do want to rewatch Ahsoka in like a binge setting. And I'm with you. I think that the model that, I think Amazon do it, they do it with The Boys, which I'm not up to date with the new season of The Boys, where they kind of, I think they drop like half the season. Or actually, the Netflix model.
Sorry, 3 episodes. Netflix do it. Yeah.
Well, so I know Amazon do the 3 episodes, then kind of 1 or 2 a week sort of thing. But then the Netflix, what they've done with a few now is instead of doing it all at once, they do the first half of the season, wait like a month, and then do the second half. And I'm like,
yeah,
I know why Disney do it. I know streaming services want to do it weekly because you keep people on and you get discussion shows, and it builds up a lot of momentum, as opposed to like a new season of The Witcher comes out, everyone talks about it for 2 weeks, then it's gone. And then everyone talks about it for 2 weeks, and then it's gone. At least with this, it's 8 solid weeks plus on the other side of things of people discussing it. And a lot of people do the binge thing, where so then once it gets to like 9 or 10 or 11 weeks after the first episode aired, a huge group of people then binge it. So I get why they do it, but I think for me, I would prefer it 2 halves. Or even like half, quarter. I would be fine with that, because I'm like you, especially after Megan and I binged Agatha all along. Even though I didn't think the show was amazing, because we just kind of vibed with Agatha, we just watched it when we wanted to. And we were like, oh, let's just watch a handful of episodes. Because again, where a lot of these Disney shows are only about half an hour ago, when you sit down thinking, I'm going to watch a serious show, in your mind, you go 45 minutes to an hour. Finish at the half hour mark, and you're like, oh, well, it's only 7 o'clock. Let's watch another one. And that's how the binging gets you. So totally on board with that. But with these episodes, so we'll get into this episode 7. So we're going to be in so much trouble. So first of all, we start off with the Parents prologue, where they're trying to send out Truman submissions. Obviously, you did the ET comparison. Now, early on, I said, I really want all of the prologues to be parent stuff. And I think they've, for the most episodes, they've kind of done that. And I really like it when they do that. I love having a little story going on that kind of at the start of the show and then a separate thing. I think other shows have done it. I think I've seen it before, but I really like that. How have you found the parents side? I know they get reunited eventually, but how do you find the parent stuff in these shows? Were you invested, or were you just like, I want more of the other stuff?
I think all it does is it makes me think about just my own life journey, to be honest with you, because when I was watching these Spielberg type movies in the 80s, you identify with the kids. And it's about going on this amazing adventure, and they're friends, but they're having these conflicts, and they're trying to deal with these conflicts and whatever. Whereas watching this now, you're identifying more with the parents, where you're like, fucking hell, they're worried sick about where the kids are. So I think it's something that I only caught, when you go back and watch the likes of E.T., the likes of Goonies and stuff like that, and there's no weird knob jokes, which there was in the Goonies. Couldn't get away with that these days. Yeah, but no, so I think it's been interesting. I am, again, if you'd have spoken to me 24 hours ago, I'd be like, I don't think I care. However, I'm more invested now. I'm more invested in terms of, well, what do the parents really think they're doing? I mean, they're living in this almost idyllic utopian society, but they are kind of oppressed by these droids. And the Jude Law character, what's his
Jod.
name? Jod. Should be easy enough to remember, shouldn't it? But he's sort of the baddie, and he was, is evil, menacing, almost Anakin Skywalker, wasn't it? Master Skywalker, what do we do? Well, you can button yourself up. So I just think that it's. I think there's still a twist coming in the finale. I think all is not quite what it seems, but I am invested in weirdly in Jude Law's character, in Jod, in the kids, and also the parents as well, because like I say, they're just doing the maternal thing and trying to protect the kids and whatever. But I'm intrigued about the society a lot more now.
Yeah, I found that the At Attin stuff, that's been probably what's grabbed me the most, I'd say. When I watched that premiere, I was like, oh, this is different. This is interesting. And it's one of those, it's a plot point, obviously, it's plot device in a certain respect, but what it does cleverly is it hooks the viewer, it brings an air of mystery, and it immediately just shuts out any plot holes of why are the kids so surprised about space? Why couldn't they have gone out further? Why is this magical treasure planet not been found before? And it's like they've really thought about it, and they've kind of, again, I think I said this in a prior episode, so apologies to people if I'm repeating myself, but I think it's like, with a lot of Star Wars shows like Ahsoka, and unfortunately quite a lot of Filoni stuff, I think it's kind of like, okay, loosely, I want Thrawn and Ahsoka and Ezra. And I want a cool thing with a wolf, and let's do this other cool thing. And let's Sabine a bit. And you're, okay, now let's write in that. And I think that's kind of the Lucas method in a way. I think he has like three big ideas, and then he's like, how do I write to make these three ideas work? Whereas I think with a show like this, and I think with Andor, it's more like, yeah, there's maybe a loose idea of what we want to do, but you start writing the character, and as you go, oh, we'll change this and we'll develop this, and the characters actually, because you hear from a lot of directors and writer-directors especially, some of the most iconic parts or favourite scenes of people's films, a lot of the time are because a scene they had didn't work, or an actor was ill, or there was some sort of behind-the-scenes issue which meant they couldn't do what they wanted, so they had to be clever and change things, and then in doing that, it created something better. But I think the problem is when you have a powerhouse like Disney that has essentially infinite resources, insane CGI department, and you don't even need to go on location to shoot anywhere anymore, you kind of take away the, lack of a better term, almost the grittiness of filmmaking. You're kind of like, every problem is solved. You don't need to worry about any of them. And it's like, as long as your main actor doesn't get injured, which you've got loads of stunt doubles for them, as long as that doesn't happen, everything you've started thinking about as you go into it pretty much is going to happen. And I think that's a fault, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. It's a good point. And I'm going to completely contradict myself. You mentioned about the wolf. So obviously, I forget what his name is,
Brutus.
but obviously, Brutus, he gets killed off. Obviously, him, and he got edited out of New Hope, didn't he?
Yeah,
but I do remember him.
The species.
Yeah, I do remember him in the cantina. It's like quite an iconic look. But yeah, he won't be going to the cantina again, I guess.
No, definitely not. So with this episode, we'll dot around the plot because it's only 30 odd minutes of minus the prologue and stuff. It's really 25. So you say this episode really changed a lot of your kind of excitement for the show. So why? What would you like so much about the episode?
Well, I think the fact that they were building up Jude Law or Jod, I think there's this question mark about what is he? He was sort of, when he said, "Oh yeah, I'm a Jedi," but I think it was the end of episode 1 or the first couple of episodes, definitely. And you're thinking, well, he's just kidding the kids, and he's just, oh yeah, totally a Jedi, mate. And you're thinking, oh no, he's full of shit. And then you're like, oh, he does seem to have some kind of force powers. And then we've seen this before, haven't we? With a little bit of misdirection, someone can pretend to be a Jedi, but they're not really. And then you're thinking, oh, he's going to be good, isn't he? Because he's a bit of a crappy pirate. He got overthrown by, there was a mutiny when he was in charge the first time. That was like literally the first scene in the first episode. And you're thinking, oh, but he's good, isn't he? And it's funny, it's a bit of a kid's show. But it was really quite menacing. but I'm still not totally convinced. So by the end, when we see all of the money, all of the Imperial credits that they have stored there, and again, there's this weird oppression where the humans are being looked after by the droids, or say looked after, but told what to do, not forcefully, but, strongly encouraged. And like, okay, why have they got all of those vaults? 1,000 and however many they said.
1,139.
I knew you'd write
I noted
it down.
that because Star Wars are one of the most common numbers you'll see is 1,138 because George Lucas's directorial debut was THX 1138. That's why. So when I heard it, I was like, they're going to say it at 9, and I was like, so my predictions, that vault's going to blow up because then it will mean they do have 1,138 volts.
Get rid of one. But and like I say, it portrayed Jod as this. He's evil. We think he's going to turn good, but I'm like, okay, but what is the real reason? You've got this almost. I mean, it's a Matrix almost type of monster, wasn't it? Moving all the things around. It was a little bit easy the way he just like, oh yeah, I'm the guy that you want, and so they've got all this security around this planet, and they just fucking let Jod in. It's ridiculous, but I can get past that. But yeah, and you can see, he'd had his speech about being hungry, and you've got all these, bad guys, if you like, all these pirates, but they're in crime because they've got no money. That's the only option left to them. Whereas you got this planet who's hoarding all of this money. We don't know what for. They just a massive Switzerland or something like that. Just what are they doing with it there? So I feel like the parents are almost gonna have their own arc where they find out, oh well, everything we thought was real is no longer real. So I think there was the stuff with Jod that really brought me in, but also that intrigue about what is this planet and why is it hoarding all these Imperial credits? Are they just hoarding them, or are they like a banking clan or something like that? So yeah, all of these questions, whereas in the previous episodes, I don't think I really had that many questions. You know what I mean? When you finish watching something, sometimes you're like, oh, if you finish watching 12 Monkeys or something like that, you're like, holy shit, and you're thinking about it. That's what I'm always looking for when I watch something. Whereas if I watch it and I'm like, yeah, that was all right, that's probably not brought me in.
Yeah, I get that. And that's one of the beauties of Andor, and I can kind of rationalize with Andor why it works so well, but a lot of it is just a feeling. You just watch it and you go, this is phenomenal. You just watch it and you go, as soon as you finish an episode, you're like, I want to know what happens next. Every character I'm invested in, even the characters I didn't like as much. I always think of that heist arc. I didn't like all the characters there, but I was invested in them. Even the dickhead guy, when he died, I was like, oh, I'm not emotional about it. I'm like, oh, okay, that's most of the people in this heist wiped out. But yeah, it's a weird one with this because I do agree to an extent. Like, what I was thinking was, I didn't want this series, once we got to the halfway mark, I didn't want it to just keep being the kids constantly trying to find their way home, and then I didn't want the last episode to be like, oh, we got home, we're fine, done, bing, and then that'd be the end. But also, I didn't really want them still to be stuck out in space when the series ended, because then I like series where a series is, you can watch one series and it can conclude things.
Yeah.
And you're satisfied, but you want more.
There's a little teaser for something else bigger.
Exactly, yeah. I like that. I don't always like it with seasons where the ending is like this giant cliffhanger just to force you to watch the next one, because I find that a lot of the time that happens and studios cancel things, and then you're just left with a show that, why even bother watching this if it's 1.5 series long and then it ends on a cliffhanger? Like, what's the point? So I agree with you. I've been enjoying the show. I've said it quite consistently. I've been like, I think I'm enjoying it. It's refreshing. But also the thing I kind of like about it is also the thing I don't like about it, which is it's such an easy watch and it's so pleasant. It's like, yeah, no pressure to watch it, easy going. But also, in the same token, I'm like, but if I wasn't doing this podcast and I missed a couple of I didn't get to watch this for a while, I wouldn't really be chomping at the bit for it. I wouldn't be like, I need to see the next one. I mean, with Acolyte, it had its flaws, but I was really interested in what was next. because of, I was like, there's so much here, there's so many characters, like something cool is going to happen eventually, and eventually it did. But with this, I'm like, this is nice. It's it's like a nice stroll in the woods. Really good. Really, I like a nice stroll in the woods. But when I'm at home, I'm not just like vying for that. I'm not thinking, God, you know what I need? A stroll in the woods. Unless I've had like a stressful time. If I've had a stressful time, I'm like, I could use a stroll in the woods, but I'm never like hankering for it. And that's how I would describe this. It's like, it's really nice. It's refreshing. But until, the At Attin stuff really kind of, we got that little bit extra. It was all a bit weird. And then, as you say, once you've got in like, I was getting like 1984 vibes, or even like V for Vendetta a little bit, which is kind of like, no, we're in this safe world. Everything's fine. Like in V for Vendetta with Evie, Natalie Portman's character, she's like, oh yeah, it's a bit bad. And obviously, the fascist dictator is a dick. But, generally, if you keep to yourself, you're fine. And then actually, no, the veneer gets pulled off. Steve, especially when she escapes with V and then sees Stephen Fry and kind of hides with him and then goes through that transformation, which I love that film so much. I know the book's great as well. But with that, I'm like, what's happening here? Utilitarian, like, government? It's like a fascist? Like, what is it? And when they're like saying, you can't send out any transmissions. Why? You can't. We're going to stun you all. And it's like, this... If this was any other show, they would not be stunning. I think it would be a lot more. Not another show. Maybe if it was a different franchise, I think it would be a bit more brutal in certain respects. But I like that when they get stunned, they're like, just leave her. Neil's mum, just leave her. We've got more important things. I'm like, I actually really connect with those parents, and At Attin is really, really interesting to me.
Yeah, and I do feel like, although when you started off, it was like this different pocket in the Star Wars universe, I do feel like at the end of the series, it's going to have implications that are going to affect other things as well. So that's what I'm looking forward to. Because although, we've talked in the past about, we don't need to see this, against the Empire or the New Order. It's the same stuff. It doesn't have to have anything to do with the Skywalkers. Actually, I need it to mean something. And so I think now it's getting to that point.
And what have you found about like sort of the pirates themselves, the pirates, including Smee or SM33? How have you found them?
So again, because I'm framed in the context of the Goonies, I think like the Fratellis.
Yeah.
Whereas, like you say, if you had this in an R-rated movie or something, they would be, vicious, dangerous people. Whereas here, they're a bit comedy, aren't they? And even though Jod, he'd have been killed several times over, wouldn't he? It's like, oh, let's put him in the airlock. We're gonna press it right now. We're gonna press it. No, and he manages to talk his way out again. It's just that's one of the things that actually I find quite endearing about it. It's just a bit silly. It's like they're sort of mean, but they're not terrible people. They're
not like sadists.
Yeah, but like I say, just in that Goonies type of way, I'd say.
Yeah, I think what I like about this show is that although I've been saying, it's solid 7 to 8 out of 10, not blow me away, but a good show. I like the fact that this show is, I think more than any other Star Wars show out, apart from again maybe Andor, that it really is what it says on the tin.
Mm-hmm.
You go into it and it's advertised as basically it's a Star Wars show aimed for sort of preteens, kids, but not like proper children, not like 5-year-olds. This is meant for kids, but it's also works for adults like Goonies, like ET, etc. The family blockbuster vibe. That's what it is without it being all animated and CGI and not Pixar, etc. It's like it's a family adventure series, and you watch it, you go, this is a good family adventure series. This is exactly what I kind of wanted. Whereas I think, again, Book of Boba Fett. Oh, it's the coolest character in Star Wars ever. Yep, we've ruined him. Acolyte. Yeah. Is it going to be a mystery thriller in this new era? What are we going to do with it? Make all the characters actually kind of boring, take away most of the mystery element, and then put really, really, really long flashbacks in that you don't really need. And you're like, okay. Oh, Mandalorian. Yeah. It's a gunslinger by himself. Is it? Well, yeah, for the first few episodes, and then he's just going to become basically a dad, and then after that, he's essentially an immortal, untouchable being with the next Yoda. And you're like, well, that's cool, but you've got no dramatic attention now because you're all basically invincible. And I think, and with Ahsoka, it's like, oh, we're going to find out what happens with Thrawn. And it's like, oh, yeah, he's just on a planet with Ezra. And you're like, okay. Yeah. Oh, and then he escapes. Okay. you could have said that in like 2 sentences. But I know I'm being reductive intentionally, but I'm like, with this, it's not that. And I think there's not really any spoilers with this. I think this episode's probably the first episode where anything has happened that even could be considered a spoiler, in a sense of, if you heard what happened in this episode and then a few weeks later you watch Skeleton Crew, I think it could spoil it a bit. But I think if I told you what happened in the last episode and you watched and it was the same thing, you wouldn't really retain the information in the same way, if you know what I mean. This felt a lot more substantial.
Yeah, and I guess if I'm to forgive it and be slightly hypocritical as well, I do get that they've focused more on the characters. Like you say, in terms of the plot driving forward, well, they just went somewhere else. But the main point of last week was more about the interaction, wasn't there, between certain characters and their growth and them getting past some conflict. And so I kind of get that, but it's not enough to pull, or it wasn't enough to pull me in.
Yeah, I get that. Last episode, I loved it. I really loved last episode, even though I did say earlier, there was a bit of a lull, which I get. Even though I loved it, I wasn't like chomping at the bit to watch this week's episode. I was just like averagely excited to watch Star Wars. But I did love KB's character and her. Tonya and I spoke about it quite a bit, like the representation of not only just disabilities, but also lots of other things. And when I spoke with Douglas Vincent, actually, yesterday, which that episode won't be out on Genuine Chit-Chat for several weeks yet, but I spoke to him about Star Wars loads. And he said what he actually, he really enjoyed about the episode as well was there's so much to it when it comes to the disability thing, because it is, again, like, from his perspective, having a mental health condition as serious as his is, dissociative identity disorder, sometimes with his friends, he can get frustrated because sometimes his friends think, oh, you can do anything like a normal person. He's like, but I appreciate you're trying to include me like that, but it's kind of understating how much I struggle every day with DID. And I think with KB, it was kind of that. It was like, oh, you can do everything we can do. And she's like, mostly, but it takes me so much more effort and so much more time. And I think, as you say, this is a really character-driven show. And I just think these kids they're better. These kids are better actors than, let's be honest, a lot of people who are adults in Star Wars. Thinking about you, certain characters in the prequels, but also in certain other contexts. Some of the other things I've seen, I'm like, these kids are really nailing it, especially in this. Like, although they weren't really the focus in this. This episode was really much more about Jordan the pirates and the parents, and the kids are kind of in between that. They're the thing that connects the two. But I found that even seeing Wim and him just by himself and have those quiet moments, and then if you watch this episode in isolation, obviously it ruined quite a few things for you. I think apart from probably KB, because she didn't have much to say, you could really get a decent understanding of Wim, Fern, and Neel in this.
Yeah, definitely. No, great little actors. We'll definitely see these popping up in other things as well, I'm sure. But I guess the budgets that Disney can put behind these things, you're going to have the top talent, aren't you? So it's not like they've just dragged someone out of high school. These kids have probably already been acting for like 5 years or something.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to know, because with kids especially, you really have to have a timescale. It's like they're developing a new Harry Potter series, which I'm not thrilled about, but they're developing a new Harry Potter series and they've been casting and getting kids involved. But I'm like, you really don't have much time. If you and I somehow got cast into a movie and it took 3 years to develop, we're not really going to look any different. This is kind of us. No. But a kid, 6 months, could you think of when you're a kid and when it's like summer happens and one of your mates has a growth spurt and you're like, what happened to you? Suddenly you got bum fluff and you're like suddenly 6 foot tall.
So weirdly, just coming out this week, oh no, we released this one. I'm used to doing Clone Wars conversations
like
where
really
we don't release it for ages. But we've done National Lampoon's Vacation from '83, and Anthony Michael Hall is in there, and he's about the same height as it is on-screen mum Beverly D'Angelo, but they had to come back and do some reshoots for the end scene, and then you suddenly see in the movie he's suddenly about a foot taller than her. It's not that obvious if you're not sort of watching it intently, but yeah, same with these kids. They're in the next sort of 10 years, they're going to age massively. So, yeah, it's interesting.
And I wonder what a process is like for this, because like with kids, especially, as you know, even more than me, because you've got kids, is like 6 months of kids development is like 4 years of like an air quotes fully formed adult in their sort of mid 20s onwards. And so I'm like, I would be interested, not enough to look into this, because I'm sure you can find this. I'm just loosely telling the world I'm interested, and hopefully someone who knows can tell me in a very short period of time without me researching. But like, what the process is like, because surely like the kid who plays Wim, for example, like surely they must have auditioned him 6 months, maybe before that. But I'm thinking if they auditioned him a year earlier, physically he would look different and he'd be too young. So it's like, do they have to audition the kids when they're too young and go from there? Or is it really, once they've auditioned the kids, maybe it's something like they audition the kids and kind of, I know American terms aren't like this, but like audition the kids around Easter time, and then summer comes around and they get in there. That must be how they do it, because I'm like, you wait a year, these kids will be different. So I'd be interested to know what that is. But I do know that the kid who plays Neel, Robert Timothy Smith, he was in 3 things that were all released this year. And there was something called Wolves, which is a Brad Pitt, George Clooney movie on Apple TV Plus, also directed by John Watts, funnily enough. And then he was also in Dear Santa, which is the new Jack Black movie where some kids write to Santa. I think they misspell, write Satan, and then he's meant to be Satan pretending to be Santa. All of that came out this year. And then he was in something called Mythic Quest, which I've seen, and Good Girls, and a couple of other things as like a young kid. But really, it was kind of like he was in a few things here and there. Then I think he probably went back to school for a bit, and then suddenly it's like, wow, this kid can really act. But then again, like it's like Dear Santa, Wolves, Skeleton Crew all come out in the year, and I'm like, he's going to be big, especially with that kind of portfolio.
Yeah, so I'm just looking now. He was actually born in 2011.
Oh God,
so that'd make him. Yeah, so that'd make him 13. Because we're just in 225 now, aren't we? But so 30. I don't think they're going to change that much. In 6 months, say. I think and they'll know roughly how old they are and what trajectory they're on. So I think they'll, and they've been making movies with kids for a long time. So I think they'll have that down to a T.
Well, I'm looking actually at each of the kids, and they all have acted in quite a few things before this. And funny enough, the guy who plays Wim, which is Ravi Cabot-Conyers, he's in Encanto. He plays the young brother. I don't know if you've seen Encanto, but the little boy.
No.
It's a good movie. It's worth a watch. But it's fun. But there's a little boy in it called Antonio who I think he can talk to animals or can shapeshift or something. I can't remember which he is, but he's in that. So he's in quite a few things. I'm scrolling back. It seems like this kid has been acting since 2016.
Yeah, so acting credits, 17 acting credits. He's been busy.
Yeah, he has. And then I think Ryan Kira Armstrong, who plays Fern, again, I think she was in American Horror Story in 2011. She was in like something called Firestarter. She's been in quite a few things as well. So I think that, these kids definitely on the Tomorrow War. Oh, she was in Black Widow, weirdly enough. She played young Antonia. So I think that was the flashback of when they were all like a family when they were super young. So like,
oh yeah,
they've all been, and looking at it, they've all actually got quite a lot of acting chops. But I imagine I think kids don't generally recognize actors as much. But then I think when you're an adult, I don't know about others, but I don't generally recognize kid actors very much. Like, I don't know why. When they're teenagers, I kind of get it. Or if I see the same kid in a few things. But I feel like if this wasn't a show that I'm watching, once a week for 8 weeks, I don't really know if I'd recognize them. Not because they're not great, but just because there's certain kids that I see, and I see people that grow up, and then they're like, this actor's really good. What have they been in? And I look at it and I'm like, there are these 3 films I watched all in succession as a kid, and I just never clicked. So all the kids are great, and they've had lots of acting chops and things. So then we get on to Smee. What do you think about Smee? He's not been in the last couple episodes as much, and maybe he's probably not going to be in the next episode. But
no, it doesn't look like it, does it? I mean, he's been an interesting character. I wasn't sure about his switch. It was. Again, I want things to be consistent. I know it's aimed at a younger generation, but that was almost too far. It's like, oh, he suddenly, just because they said switch, for this made up kids thing, it's like, oh, right, okay, and just gets the kids away. So I thought that was pretty weak, to be honest. But I think he's been good. I don't think he's quite at the K2SO level. I think he's still a level above. But yeah, Nick Frost's done a good job there.
I do, because I think Tonya mentioned, I think because it might have been the last episode or maybe it was the episode before, but it was mentioned that with Smee, the thing is that, or SM33, when he didn't turn, when he did say, like, I think it was the episode before when he was like, I'm sorry, kids. And he just had, I think Tonya mentioned it in our conversation referring to the prior episode. And he was like, yeah, I'm sorry, kids. And he had to do it. And we were like, yeah, that's good. He's a droid, but he's aware enough what he's doing is he doesn't want to be doing it, but he still has to follow his programming. And then, I think with this one, I mean, it's hard because I think what they should have done is said, and I feel like this would have been a really easy thing, which when he said, you can't be the captain of both vessels, and then him and Fern both should have said at the same time, I'm the captain of the ship now. And then what Smee should have done is hit Jod and then said, you forgot to renounce your captainship, your captainness. You forgot to renounce yourself being a captain of wherever the previous ship is. And if he that's it. According to the pirate, I mean, the pirate code's not a thing in Star Wars. They've created it for this. So it's like, you can put anything in there. So all you need to say is to become a captain of another vessel, you have to either relinquish the last vessel, someone has to mutiny and take it over, or you just temporarily give it to your first mate or something. And that would have, I feel like that's a really obvious thing that they could have just said. Yeah. And that could have actually been both Fern and Jod say at the same time. And then Smee's just standing there looking at them both, left to right. And then does the comical bam to Jod.
Yeah.
And then she goes, oh my God, you chose us. And he's like, I didn't choose you, I'm afraid. He just didn't relinquish his previous ship and have to follow the pirate code. And I'm like, that would have made so much sense, would have been keeping with the character, and I think would have actually been better. So I agree. That was the one bit where, in this episode, I was like, why establish he can't make it, he has to follow the pirate code?
Yeah.
And I guess it's because he says kind of close enough, and they kind of say claimsies.
Yeah.
And I'm like, but also Wim does kind of say it out loud first, but his mouth gets covered, and I'm like, surely Smee could have just punched him and said, actually, Wim's the captain now. Like that, again, it's just, that's the one scene I've seen in this. I mean, the Tonya and I did criticize elements of the crab scene kind of thing as well, but I feel like that's more the CG, more so, where they visualize the CG more than the actual necessarily the writing. But in this bit, I was the one scene where actually, although this is probably my favorite episode so far, there's the one scene where I was like, this does jar with me a little bit.
Yeah, like you say, there was that, and there was also that Jod didn't get challenged by the robots or the androids at all.
Yeah.
It's not like he's dressed up like Lando Calrissian, is he? He probably looks like a pilot. Yeah,
he's got no ID.
Pirate.
Yeah, I feel like he could have. They could have just said, "Where's your identification?" He's like, "Scan the ship" or something. Or if he had he could have just said, "I knew this would come in handy," and he's got an old Republic ID card or something.
Yeah. It's an older code, but it checks out.
That would have been, and we could have had a droid say that. That'd have been fun. Yeah. So I think there are little bits here that didn't fully work, but I think overall it still works. So how did you find then the kind of the final scene where they get on the ship and they go to At Attin, they get through the barrier thing, and then they land and go to the vault stuff? How did you find the kind of last part?
Yeah, that was the bit where I was just like, holy shit, this actually does mean something. I thought the big kind of robot thing that's orchestrating everything in the middle there gave me real Matrix vibes. I thought the CG was a little bit off when he pulled the credits and they're all kind of falling down like water, but the physics of it was just a bit weird. But again, it just made me think, oh, what is this? What's going to happen? And again, none of the androids are kind of like, well, this is a bit of weird behavior, isn't it, for this guy who's supposed to be here? So yeah, I just thought or you could even say the Raiders of the Lost Ark, wasn't it? When he walks into the vault, a bit like the whole Area 51 thing. It's again, I'm not sure if that was the deliberate callback. I suspect it was.
Probably.
But yeah, I'm chomping at the bit now. I want to see where this goes, and again, I just feel like if it was a normal story without the kind of fascism bit, if you like, the oppression. I think I just think that okay, Jod he's definitely a baddie, and he's going to get his comeuppance in the next episode. But now I'm just thinking, what are they actually going to do? And the mad thing about it was as well, we've seen like Vader say at the end of Rogue One, come in and take names in one of the most iconic scenes, and Vader and Darth Maul as well when they're wielding that red saber, it looks menacing, doesn't it? When Jod was threatening the kids basically with what looked like a Jedi saber, you're like, oh, well, this is a bit weird. And the only time we've really seen that, and a lot of it was off panel, I guess, was the Anakin Skywalker bit, wasn't it? When he slaughtered all the younglings. So I just thought that was quite odd to see. Again, this so-called evil person who we've been a bit on the fence, like, is he evil? Is he actually going to come good? And now in the penultimate episode, we're like, oh yeah, he seems a bit of an arsehole, really. He's just in it for himself. He's calling the kids spoiled and everything, and not a very nice person. I just feel there's a twist coming. It might not be, but we'll see.
Yeah, it is hard to know what's going to happen next, because it's like, well, the pirates in theory can't just come down. Is Jod going to try and turn the barrier off or something? But I'm like, surely he wouldn't be able to do that. Also, did you notice, I'm fairly certain this is the case, I was just looking at my phone to see if I could find out, but I feel like the supervisor voice over the Tannoy was Stephen Fry.
Yeah, it is. Yeah,
and I was like,
definitely undistinguishable.
Yeah, and I'm like,
unmistakable.
Yeah, I'm very distinguished and unmistakable. Yeah. And so I'm interested to be like, is the supervisor actually just like a droid that essentially was told you need to protect? Because I wonder if it is just going to be a thing of like where like they had these defenses set up and then a war broke out. And then this droid controller thing said they like the main command is to save the population. And it's like, well, what's the best way to save it? Is to protect them. But it's also funny because like I've been thinking about At Attin as well. And I'm like, it's in the context of Star Wars. I was like, how would they get food? How come they're not inbreeding and stuff like that? But then I'm like, no, but planet Earth, that's how. And I'm like, oh yeah. Because in Star Wars, because all the planets are so like, almost monobiomes, whereas like here's a forest world, here's a sand world, here's a water world. There's very few. That Naboo I think is one. I think Alderaan was one as well that actually have like Earth-like biomes.
Yeah,
and it's like you kind of I at least forget because in Star Wars it's so segregated. I think of almost planets in Star Wars like countries. Yeah, whereas actually they're planets. Like there's a lot of people and they're so massive. So. I did kind of think that, but I'm certainly interested by those, by the droids and the supervisor. But yeah, George just getting into the vault, and I'm confused what it was meant to show. It's meant to be a Republic emissary. Is he meant to get there to collect credits to go out and buy stuff to bring it back? Was he meant to be delivering stuff? And as you say, the droids were just like, oh yeah, there's a guy that's rubbing his face into loads of bits of metal money. That's normal. Let's just stand here and watch him. And you're like,
yeah.
Do people normally do that and laugh maniacally while they're doing it?
Because they're droids, but they seem to have sentience, don't they? All the droids in Star Wars, they seem to have personalities. It's not like they would just. It's not like your microwave just watching a guy. They should notice this weird end scene there. But again, I kind of forgave that bit because it's one of those things you see in old pirate movies and stuff, isn't it? The chest gets split open and then all the gold coins are spilling out onto the floor. So I'll forgive him that one.
Yeah, I guess also you can kind of go, Job was just being weird because he's a weird guy. And you're like, yeah, I guess. But yeah, I'm really interested to see what else happens in this. I'm interested by how there are, 1,139 volts, seemingly with like each of those Republic credits. What it seems the vibe is by the amount of shock people are like, oh my God, that one credit. I feel like it's probably about the equivalent of about £1,000, like each one. And I'm thinking that one volt probably had the amount of money that like Earth had. So why do you need that many more? What are they spending their money on? Because it's printing money, but the economy At Attin doesn't seem to be in a weird recession. It doesn't seem like they went into like a hyperinflation crisis or anything like that. So I'm finding it hard to conceptualize why would they have that amount of money, unless maybe it's going to be a thing where, as you say, maybe it was a banking world in the Old Republic, and then a war happened, they closed off everything, and they're just stuck with all this money.
Yeah, and it doesn't make sense, does it? And that's why I think it will have ramifications. Has this all been closed off? Is this the money that will fund what becomes the new order or something like that? There's going to be something that happens because, as we're seeing right now, you could ask, well, why have billionaires? But let's not go too far down that route, because they're not spending it; they're just hoarding it. It's just there, so they don't seem to be trading with other planets. So I think those questions will be answered. I don't think, like say, you could print off all your own money, but it's like, say if we printed off all the pounds that we want, well, that doesn't mean that we'd be able to go through to other countries and just buy whatever we want. Inflation would rocket, the value of the pound would plummet. So it's all very complicated, and that's why I feel like we're in the era, after the prequels, and we've talked about it a lot on Clone Wars, where Clone Wars made the prequels better because it answered a lot of the questions and it filled in a lot of the gaps and plot holes and stuff like that. I feel like stuff like Skeleton Crew is it's trying to make sense of the sequels now. So again, that's why I feel like having all of these Imperial credits, all of this money, it will have a big impact. Wherever this finishes, it will have a much bigger impact than this smaller story that we've been watching.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. One ending I think I would quite like that would connect to the sequels would be like Jude manages to let's say everything out of one vault and then destroy the vault. That's the end, and he zooms off. And then right at the end, he just gives large chunks of that money to someone. And it's like, I hope the New Order does well, or something like that. There's some connection to the First Order. I would actually, because there's a book called Bloodline with Leia, and it's set sort of like halfway almost between episode 6 and 7. I think it's a bit close to 7 thinking about it. And it's like, basically the reveal is, and it's on the cover and the back, it's essentially how people found out about Leia's heritage and what that did politically to her, of people finding that out, and also what the environment was like. How did the First Order come about in a political climate with the New Republic? And it shows all of the shortcomings. And there's points in that book where there's a person who you later find out is associated with the First Order, and they talk about like financiers, and it's a lot of hush money to like keep this area of the galaxy quiet. Like, we're having to build all these ships and things to make this fleet away from the New Republic before we can fight them, and this kind of stuff. Like, when The Force Awakens starts, the First Order's a fully formed army. And as you say, like, how do they get that in secret? And I think, as you say, this would actually make quite a lot of sense as how the money got there in some respect. But I don't know.
So if I was to make a wild, ill-informed prediction,
do it.
I would say Jod will be thwarted. Right, he's not going to get away with the money, but the parents or At Attin will overcome them or whatever. But they will be the ones who fund the New Order somehow.
Maybe as a promise to like hush money. Maybe a New Order, maybe a First Order ship stumbles upon At Attin, and they're like, "We'll give you this if you erase your flight records or something."
Yeah, I'm not sure, but definitely it feels like there's some kind of twist coming there. I mean, there might not be a twist, and it's just as obvious as we think it's going to be. But no, I just feel like there's something sinister in At Attin. Yeah, and that's why I feel like they're going to fall on the New Order side.
Or maybe we're thinking too much. Or maybe Thrawn will just pop up there. Maybe they'll fund Thrawn.
Could do, yeah.
You know, we're thinking like sequel
or Palpatine.
Stuff.
You know, someone of Palpatine's here to collect his money.
Or maybe Snoke. Maybe Snoke pops up. I mean, there's lots of. It's funny because whenever there's theories about Star Wars, I think everyone jumps to so many ridiculous theories, including myself, and it's normally something quite benign, as you say. It's normally something quite... There's the occasional twist, but usually it's quite simple. But is there anything else you wanted to mention? I think we've touched pretty much everything in this episode and generally Skeleton Crew. Is there anything you want to mention before we wrap up?
Only to repeat myself, I think I am all in now, and I can't wait for next week.
All in for At Attin. Amazing stuff. Yeah, I think next week, I haven't fully decided. I need to figure out because we're doing it in a week. There's people keep asking me about doing a roundtable discussion, so I don't know. If I do, I'll message people. I'll see what the vibes are and see what people kind of want to do. So next week might be a roundtable, might not be. We'll figure it out. But Dave, I'll put details in the description, obviously to Clone Wars Conversations, because anyone listening to this, if you enjoy Star Wars stuff, myself, Dave, and Math are going through the Clone Wars animated series. Dave's seen it all once before, but now can't remember as much of where we are at the point. I've seen it twice or 3 times, and Math has never seen it before. We've already watched Star Wars Rebels. He's seen all the live action stuff, so it's really cool going through that. And we have many, many plans when we finish Clone Wars. We're gonna watch Revenge of the Sith, which Math hasn't watched in like years, which I'm excited for. Bad Batch, all the other movies and stuff. Very exciting stuff to come. So wherever you're listening to this on the feed of Comics in Motion or Star Wars Comics in Canon, that will also be where Clone Wars Conversations is, and also on the YouTube channel of Genuine Chit-Chat as well. So all good stuff there. Dave, I'll put all your links in the description for VHS, CD Reality, Age of Apocalypse, but just say your final plugs and we'll wrap this up.
I think you've done them all. The only thing to add for that is I picked up Dark Disciple today, good. So I can start working my way through. But we're not doing that one next on Clone Wars Conversations, are we? We're doing the unreleased episodes first.
And that's Monday 20th, so you've got about a week and a half until then. And then I imagine we'll see, when we're recording them, we'll just see how far you guys are in the audiobook, and from there we'll kind of judge from there. But that will probably be recorded in sort of February time. So I think by sort of mid to late Feb, all of Clone Wars Conversations, including Clone Wars Legacy, will be out, and then we can get to season 7.
Yeah.
Very excited.
And then finally, bloody Revenge of the Sith. I've been chomping the bit since about October.
Same. I'm so close. I want to watch it over Christmas so bad. It's one of my comfort Star Wars films. I love it so much, even though it hurts a lot. But I'm like, no, I've got to stick with it for the guys.
Yeah.
I can't wait. Just with VHS, just quick, we've only briefly mentioned it, and because we're actually for once recording, and this will be coming out within the next 24 hours, tell people a little bit about VHS and the recent releases there, because I'm sure if they enjoy this and they enjoy your voice, if they don't already know about VHS, plug away, sir.
Yeah, so I mentioned it before. We were doing National Lampoon's Vacation. We've had an interesting few weeks because going back even to Christmas Day. So coming out on Christmas Day, we had Chris's pick, which was Santa with Muscles, which was an abomination, probably the worst Christmas movie that you are ever likely to see. Hulk Hogan basically sleepwalking through this weird movie what's the guy's name? The Wolf of Wall Street guy.
Jordan Belfort.
Yeah, Jordan Belfort. He was an executive producer on it, and I'm sure he put it together or signed it off in some kind of cocaine binge. So yeah, I had to get Chris back with some sword and sorcery. So I pulled out one of the terrible sword and sorcery movies as
partly
well.
Through that at the moment, it's gore, isn't it? I'm
gore, yeah. So amazingly bad movie, but didn't quite work as I hoped for, because there was a
very
barbarian,
busty
lady in it.
It's quite a simple man to please. It's just I hate high fantasy, but there's a really busty, nearly naked woman in it. I don't mind it.
It's funny, looking back at those early 80s sword and sorcery, you kind of have almost post-Conan. There was this explosion of these low-budget things. And what I'd say is usually the movies were pretty terrible. You'd go in Morocco or something and just, get some rags and get people to throw around swords. But if you look at the artwork that was put together, the VHS covers that were there to pull you in, some amazing artwork, and including gore. But yeah, the movie was actually terrible. And then what are we doing next
American
week?
Psycho, innit?
American Psycho, that's the one. Yeah, so from 2000, that one. So a little bit that's towards the other end of the scale. But again, really, Christian Bale, like some of these kid characters, he'd been in loads of stuff from being a kid, amazing young actor, but that was his real adult breakout, and that really got him the role for Batman in the Nolan trilogy. So yeah, obviously we absolutely love the VHS. It's a good excuse to go back into the movies, but also just reminisce about the time in our lives, when we either watched it or just when it's set. Or I think that's what we kind of love about it more than the actual terrible movies that we watch sometimes.
Yeah, I'd say it's almost like you do it weekly, and you do films prior to 2005. Obviously, if you do films after that, patron supporters get that, which I'm one, so I get fee stuff.
But you get
no worries. You support me as well, so it's all good. But with VHS, what I like is normally 4 episodes a month. 2 of the films you've pretty much definitely heard of. Normally, usually on average, I say 1 is a good movie. Sometimes it's amazing, or it was great, and then you watch and you go, this hasn't aged well. So 1's normally a movie everyone's kind of heard of. 1's normally like maybe an underground-ish film, but a lot of people have probably heard of it. And then the other 2 is random because obviously patrons often choose them. And sometimes it's something no one's ever heard of. And there's some of my favorite episodes because I'm like, I don't need to watch this. I might watch the trailer and look at some images on IMDb just to see what it's about, or maybe to see what these busty barbarians they're talking about are. And then, and then like, aside from that, you can just, and that's one of the things I like about Spider-Dan's show as well, is just like, sometimes you tackle such weird, obscure movies not only have I never heard of, but I'm never, ever going to watch. So you can just listen anyway. And you're like, it doesn't need to be a movie review show. Like you guys said, I think in Gore, where you're like, yeah, we're not film critics. We're not deep dive analysts, but we're just a couple of idiots really. And it's like, I love it though. It's so endearing. And that's why you've got such a following there. Cause you guys are just you. And that's the fun about it.
So I will say, I'm not going to mention the movie, but you're talking about the eclectic movies we have there. So after American Psycho, we have a Spider-Dan pick.
Oh.
And it is definitely, it would not have been in blockbusters, I don't think. So
sometimes he gets me, like when we did films, where I did the top 5 small cast movies with him. Some of his films, I was like, I've not only not heard of this, but I can't find it anywhere. And it's normally it might be on YouTube, but it's not called the name on YouTube. It's called something else, just copyright reasons. And you're like, how do you find these? Where did you first watch this to be able to then find it on the internet? But that's part of the joys of the Spider-Man journey.
Yeah, I think Dan is one of those. He has an amazing knowledge of all these obscure movies, but, hadn't watched Goodfellas, until Andy made him watch it, so I think, a lot of the movies I've never heard of. And like I say, it's not that easy to kind of find them either.
No, so you just got to listen to him.
This one is on YouTube, though. I will say that. So we could all watch it should we want to. Let's see.
We'll see. Awesome. Well, that's amazing. Well, I'll put all the links in the description. Thank you so much for coming on, Dave. As always, it's a pleasure. Although we spoke 2 days ago about Star Wars, and we will again very soon. If not next week, it will be the week after. As in, if it's not next week for the roundtable, it will be the week after for Clone Wars conversations again. But friends, thank you so much for tuning in. As always, make sure wherever you're listening to this that you like, if you can, you subscribe or follow, share, review if you're on a podcast app, comment if you're on YouTube, tell us what you think, hit that subscribe button because there's loads of great content out that's much like this, and check out the back catalogue. And of course, may the Force be with you.
Always.
You have just experienced host, creator, everything elser of Genuine Chit-Chat, and also the host and creator of Star Wars comics and canon, found on the Comics in Motion podcast, Mike Burton.